So the next thing I'm going to speak to, hopefully in a fairly kind of sequential and coherent way, has to do with the way we interact with the 5 elements and the 5 organs, or 6 in this case, because we include the gallbladder as an extraordinary organ, and I'll explain why that's included there. So there's 2 things that are included in the Nei Jing Tu about each organ. One is what you might call its state, its shen, right? So you'd say xin shen, the heart's spirit, the heart's conscious nature. So I'm going to describe them as states. And why? Because when we're in our meditation and we're working towards true soil, we're working towards igniting Mingmen, that means we have to stop allowing the 5 phases, the 5 elements, the 5 movements, especially the 4 dynamic ones, from kind of running around in an imbalanced way, just doing the things that they do. So by coming into what you might call a resonant, coherent state, awareness. Some people would think of it as a visualization, or an embodied quality of kind of coherent practice. Sort of the same, sort of different. Then you have some things to interact with as, and for. So as the embodied spiritual state of each organ. And then there's this other part that can be a kind of nickname, and there's sort of something that's alluded to here. And Taoism loves wordplay, and it drives a lot of people kind of a bit cuckoo until you start to see the patterns and get beyond the frustration of just tell me what it means. There's a few different words in Chinese for what we mean by a person's name, right? So you might introduce yourself in the sense of your official name, I'm Dr. So-and-so, or things like that. Then you might say your kind of clan name, your family name. Then you might say your kind of calling name or familiar name. Then you might also have kind of a Taoist name, which is sort of a different kind of name about what you've been recognized, as being included in a specific tradition. And then there's the kind of known as names, which have a certain, known as. And the people who know you as your friends know you a certain way and have kind of a nickname for you. And it's interesting in the Tao Te Ching when we say Tao ka Tao Fei Chong Tao, the Tao that you can kind of put into words isn't clearly something beyond words. And Ming ka Ming Fei Chong Ming, if you can name it, in the sense of Ming, you're trying to get the qualities of your friend, my friend's this kind of a person. But when you try and narrow down Tao as this kind of a friend, you're also narrowing, all of the kinds of friends it could be. So there's this sort of wordplay. Then there's this other wordplay. I apologize if this is beyond your patience for Chinese wordplay, but just one more. This Xingming Shuangshu, the dual cultivation of innate nature and your aliveness potential, or sometimes you could think of as your fortune, how many days you get to be here, your destiny. Ming and Ming, your destiny, and a certain kind of naming convention, if you will, has the same sound in a way, and a kind of a wordplay meaning. So coming back to where we're going here. So when we talk about the spiritual states of each organ, we're also going to talk about kind of a nickname for each organ, which describes its nature, but also its aliveness potential. And there's kind of a bit of a tongue-in-cheek joke in this part of the Nei Jing Tu, because it's not beyond any reasonable curious detective to recognize that they're actually talking about the Xing and Ming of each organ, the spiritual state, the innate nature, and its kind of nickname, its way of getting through life, its aliveness potential. So as we talk about the Zangfu plus, or the 5 organs and the gallbladder, I'll just translate and discuss the spiritual state and then kind of the nickname and why that might be helpful. And then you can play with those in your practice. And they're meant to be things you imitate to learn. things to imitate to find what the dynamics are like, and things to imitate in a way that allows the dynamic parts that you imitate to gradually come into something that's very balanced, because they're all very different, and in a way they kind of balance each other the way that the five elements, especially the four dynamic ones, are meant to generate that Jing Tu, the true soil, the central earth palace, the center of the heart, which is the center of the embodied mind, which is the body is the mind before the mind is the mind. So we are going to find our original mind within the stillness, coherence, and acceptance and aliveness of your embodied state. So as we enter into practice in the middle Dantian, one of our go-to opportunities is to emulate the Xing and Ming, the Shen and Zi, the spirit and the spirit or state, and the quality and sort of nature as a story of each of your five organs and your gallbladder. So we're going to start with the spleen, of course. 必神 Cheng Zai Zi Hun Ting. So Pishan, the spiritual state of your spleen. Cheng Zai. Chang is, if we go back to the Tao Te Ching, Tao Ka Tao Fei Chang Tao. Chang has to do with something that's constant. Often in colloquial Chinese we say Chang Chang, which is like something that's habitual. It keeps happening. So Chang Zai is the idea of always or consistently, perhaps constantly, Zai, which means to exist as, and it has part of the character like yo in the sense of something you can hold, something you can embrace, something that is tangible. So if you're always existing as, and then like just leave it ... always existing as. Now, humorously, don't put anything after as. And that's a lot of the quality, or I would say a tangible quality, of the Jing Tu, the true soil. So to have that sense that you're always just existing as, you're always coming into being as, like as the land, for the land, in the sense of soil. So that's the state. You know, when we think about the microcosmic orbit, if you've done any training with me or people with similar family traditions, we talk about one of the oldest microcosmic orbit practices is an affirmation of what the sky is doing. And the sky is always turning around the North Star. If you ever see a picture of the Big Dipper in the Four Seasons, it's mapped out that way. And some would say the original swastika diagram from thousands of years ago was a representation of the always turning wheel of the sky. And an interesting thing for people who practice, say, yoga, the term chakra actually describes a spinning disc or wheel or something in an orbit that's turning. So when I'm teaching the microcosmic orbit practice, that's one of the first 3 or 4 things that comes up, as to be sitting and not moving anything, but just reflecting on as above, so below. On one level, the sky is turning infinitely around its center. For us, that's the North Star, at least in modern humans. And if we can agree, well, if the universe is doing that on the outside, something like that is happening on the inside. So what would it be like to sit and exist as if time is something imminent and infinite and beyond our clockwork perception, and to let go of clockwork time? So always existing as is an invitation to just be state, be stillness, be embodied as life beyond time. And that's, again, meant to enter into that liminal or apophatic state, not apathetic, state of being completely in the now, but in the felt sense of it. 自很听, again, often known as the nickname, nudge, nudge, there's Larry doing that funny thing Larry does. 很听, 很 is the collective unconscious, the ethereal soul, the part of your ancestors that visits you in your dreams, which I often refer to as when you learn to drive, you're in the front seat with your hands on the wheel for the first time, and hopefully a skillful relative or parent is next to you or in the back seat reminding you when and how signal lights should probably work. So the idea of Hun in practice is an awareness of the ontology of Taoism, but also a tangible way of getting feedback from your nearest ancestors and or spiritual guides, depending on how you look at Hun in that way. So Hun Ting is the terrace. Ting, in this sense, is kind of like the pulpit, the top of the place people would speak from, the proverbial soapbox. It's also, in a way, used, and this is kind of funny, if you know about feng shui, the earlier practitioners of, Taoist folk shamanism and stuff, they might have a little stall at a fair, just like you might find somebody at a local market selling you handmade tarot cards or some other symbol of the cause and effect relationship with spiritual practice. So Hun Ting is in a way kind of a joke, because in a good way, a wisdom joke, if such a thing is allowed, that when you sit in the residence of always existing as, Hun is going to give you little bits of homework, kind of like a busker at a fair, saying, hey, what about this? Hey, what about this? And that's going to be a part of what comes up in your practice. So Hun Ting is your collective unconscious connection, your ancestral homework connection, nudging you through your embodied mind when you exist as the soil of embodiment. And this brings up one other thing that's worth being aware of. In the Nei Jing, from a Chinese medicine point of view, each of your organs, the solid ones and the hollow ones, has a virtue like Dao De Jing. And the virtue of soil is called Ru. And Ru means to be so at rest, so calm and relaxed that you would seep through something. And I think I've mentioned the image of lying in a hammock, relaxing so deeply that you seep or fall or melt or dissolve through the little holes in the hammock. In English, the closest word is to be in a languor state, so relaxed that you're kind of like drooling almost. So that's another word that we can use in English to be like, okay, always existing as, being in the stillness, but the sort of slow loaming turnover of soil. And those little nudges from Hun, reminding us perhaps where we're still a little bit stuck. And again, that's what that ox is tilling for, things to bring up and cultivate, because that young lad is gathering those gold coins from the cultivation of the mundane to the sacred, the conditioned, to beyond the self, from trauma to wholeness. If I was to put that onto a t-shirt, I would say sometimes your soul is speaking through your soil. So the next one is for the heart. So Sin Shen, the spirit of the heart, the state of the heart, is Dan Yuan, which means the origin of Dan, the origin of the elixir, the origin of alchemic transformation. Now, that can mean pretty much anything in the sense of alchemic work, refining substances and aspects of your conscious self. What is interesting, though, if you go really far back to the first use of the term Dan as an alchemic, like Dan Tian, the field of cultivation, the place where you do the actual alchemic transformation, the first thing when you look at the character for Dan is it's kind of like a face with something on it. And in fact, the first use of that word was for ochre, the powdered red kind of greasy paint that all early human beings somehow managed to find and use as a way, perhaps say warrior paint or ceremonial paint, or turning your face into something maybe like a bear, or maybe like, a leopard, or maybe like a god, or maybe like something else. So Dan is an affirmation that we take the ochre or now translated as cinnabar, in the sense of mercuric oxide, which is a red substance that some people used to actually drink, which would kill them. But it was the right color, and they were practicing alchemy, so, turning mercury into something, seems pretty cool. So it's this color and this relationship with, why would people paint their face? Why would people need this ceremonial sacred dance of transformation to become godlike or bear-like or beyond the self-like? So when we think of the state of the heart, what would it be like to be in the state of state shift? And this comes into that idea of the liminal, the jumping off the diving board, of the known into the unknown, giving up on the person who was afraid of jumping off the diving board to become whoever it is that's going to land in, hopefully, the swimming pool at the bottom of the diving board. So that state, that liminal state, Dan Yuan, is I'm putting on my ochre, I'm putting on my cinnabar, I'm putting myself through the transformational process towards transformation. And that's what we mean by Dan Yuan. The source of that is when the heart lets go of the self. And your heart's nickname is Zi Shaoling. So Zi, again, it's sort of the known as by its friends. Shaoling, Shou is used a lot in alchemic practice. We have Shou Yi, to consolidate, to conserve, to guard. Yi, that interactive part of your awareness. If you can't guard it, then you're going to be like the proverbial distracted kid who's, looking at every chipmunk and every, fluttering movement and everything else, because we're easily distracted. So something that we want to kind of nickname the heart is that ability to conserve, to guard, to keep the awareness narrowing in a way. And we do that towards Ling. Now that's quite the handle to have, Shou Ling, to be the one concentrating on conserving the relationship, guarding from distraction, one's connection to Ling, especially when your state is Dan Yuan, to be in the liminal, to dive in to the beyond. And if Ling is that which is coming through from beyond the sky, we're in a way deciding from the heart, the Shen, the spirit, wherever spirits reside as spirit, we're going to bounce off the top of the sky, the top of the mind, into the liminal, the numinous, into Ling. And that's our practice in our meditation, is what is that state, Dan Yuan? What is that quality, Shou Ling? What is it to be purely in a liminal state? Next one, Shen Shen, the state of your kidneys, is Xuan Ming, which in a way can mean infinite, profound, or mysterious darkness. And we'll see a kind of an indication in how to interact with that a bit later as well. So we think of the kidneys in a way as the source of yin and yang, or the root of yin and yang in the body from a Chinese medicine point of view. So when we think of spirit, Ling, fire, whatever consciousness might be, it's definitely in the realm of light. And yin being its kind of corollary, perhaps opposite, is what is the infinite version of darkness, of shadow, of the underworld, of from whence the stuff comes. We can affirm fairly easily for some reason what it is that makes minds possible, and we can kind of nod to evolution and nature about what makes the physical, the substrate of the body possible. But we don't spend as much time reaching into that and articulating that or interacting with that. So that's what's we're being invited to do, and we'll see a couple of ideas of how, when we want to be in a relationship with that spiritual state of the kidneys. So its name, Zi Yu Ying, which would mean often called having a baby, making a baby, generating the child, or even raising a child in the context of getting it to school on time and things. So a part of this is an affirmation to the Tiantai or Xiantai tradition of early Taoist practice and the idea of this celestial or immortal embryo. And the just right balance of all aspects of your kidneys, between kidneys and heart, yin and yang, are necessary for that process to be possible. Now, from a practical point of view, and again, sometimes we want to have the left brain doing something of a process or interaction so that we can fall into or feel into the quality, the more nuances of state. There's a practice in Dalian, a fairly early one, where we're kind of reaching up into the sky and either mirroring the sky, which I've spoken to, or we reach up into what's called Yin He, the Silver River or the Milky Way, and we imagine, visualize, bringing that color of light, that electric blue, kind of yellowish light, down into the body, into the dantian, into the eyes, into places that might be healing. So we can have this fairly easy to image, idea. Bring the light down, rub it all over you, good for you. But we can also reach into the blackness of space and bring that. Now that always gives people, well, I shouldn't say always, but often gives people goosebumps, because it's almost like we're daring the world, the underworld, the scarier parts, the beyond death parts of life, to also interact with and become a part of our practice. And that's not a very new age, bells and whistles, everything's all about the shiny parts. So it's not something you probably would ever run into in a contemporary Qigong class. But it is an example of something that might help us in our practice if we're wanting to connect with this aspect of the kidneys, is to do a few movements or just to visualize what it's like. Okay, that's easy to interact with all the light, the hun, the ling, the dao, all the shiny bits. What happens to xu, the emptiness, the before and beyond all of this, and to actually engage in that as what you might consider even more truly numinous or beyond the sky. So next one is Dan Shen, or the spiritual state of the gallbladder. So again, the gallbladder, although it's a hollow fu organ in the sense that things move through it and it stays the same, it's one of the extraordinary organs because it's concentrating bile, and bile has some pretty important jobs. Beyond that, the gallbladder is also a part of the wheel of cognition. So in cognition, we have it's called 意志思路, which is how we can have something come into our attention, and then we look at it and we recognize that, oh, that's an orange, and the orange remind us that maybe we're hungry, and that if we actually could see ourselves eating that, in the sense of what's called 思, now we're thinking about the orange. Do I want orange juice? Do I want to make orange peel something or other? Am I allergic to oranges? Because now we're in 思. So perception, we see something, it's an orange, recognition, sure. What do I want to do about oranges? 思, thinking about it. And then 虑, which would be the planning part, is I think I'm going to cut it up into these shapes and then do this thing with it. And that's the planning part. And then after that is 知, which is the action part, the decisiveness part, the that's a good orange part. And that's both your gallbladder and your heart. And your gallbladder and heart have a very profound collaboration when it comes to cognition and meditation and insight. In the Nei Jing, the classic for medicine, there's even a description that if someone throws a shoe, or I think it's a rock at your head, it's the paired nature of consciousness that's held by the gallbladder and heart that gives you the capacity, the insight, the decisiveness to duck. So when we think about that Dan Shen, the spiritual state of the gallbladder, those are the things that we're interacting with. And this brings up kind of a bit of a conundrum, because in some versions of this document, the character that comes next has to do with the ability, the capacity, like the strength of a bear. And the earliest form of that character, Nung, which I'll put up here, it sort of describes, the face and the body and the feet of something moving through the world. In its complete ability, hands, feet, eyes, and body. But if you go and look at the earliest ones on the bone carvings of that, it's actually the picture of something giant like a bear jumping, like chasing you or like running towards you in a way. I don't have a picture of that here, but having seen that, it's like, wow, that's almost like an indigenous cave painting of a bear running after, like, attacking something out of the darkness. So that is on some of the documents, the Nei Jing Tu documents under the gallbladder and or the liver. So I just like to bring that up because the spiritual state of the gallbladder in the contemporary version of this document is called Dragon's Glory or Long Yao, which in a way is pretty cool in the sense of dragon's glory, but I've always found that the kind of glory of the Nong Yao, the bear's ability, that more primal on the ground, capacity of something as potentially physically powerful or as dangerous as a bear, because that for me thinks of gallbladder, not because of bear gallbladders, which I could go off on, but I'm not. But just in the sense of how we imitate its nature, because it's hard to imitate a dragon if you've never seen a dragon, where it's pretty easy to imitate a bear if you've ever been chased by a bear, which we'll talk about as an example of something when we get into the training part of it. Another aspect of the gallbladder from a Chinese medicine point of view has to do with what's called xiaodan and dadan. Xiaodan means to be timid, dadan means to be audacious. So in the way we perceive the state of the gallbladder, especially around the dragon's glory, that's a pretty audacious, wild, thing to do, or thing to be. And interestingly, its nickname, Wei Ming, is a certain kind of potency or a certain kind of resiliency and radiance, Wei Ming. Now, the character of Wei, as you can see here, if you're familiar with characters, is actually a woman in a cave with a spear waiting to fight whatever comes into the cave. Now, when you think of this having had a bear in it a minute ago, that changes the kind of context and the story a little bit. But either way, the nickname of your gallbladder is to have the audacity, the capacity, the bear or dragon-like glory or warriorship or courage to wait in there as something that's, you could say in the contrast, something vulnerable, but willing to protect itself, and that is its radiance. So the state of the gallbladder is raw capacity and courage. What does raw capacity and courage feel like? Especially in that context of Wei Ming, the radiance of someone who might be smaller than your average bear, pardon the pun, but with a spear in a cave ready to face danger. So that's its quality as well. So if I was to bring all of that together, we're being invited to something that's maybe not super obvious. So when we look at that aspect of the gallbladder and cognition, we're talking about a wheel like a clock. Once you start it, it has to go from beginning to end. And that's the problem of the mundane mind. So we want to break free of that. And I've given a couple of examples about how to do that. So if we go into pure mental stillness, and we're not going to start perception to recognition to story, we're just going to stay with yi, show yi, conserve yi. That's the gateway to this idea of Jing Jing, the purifying stillness. And there's a book that's very important in early Taoist practice called the Jing Jing Jing, the clarity and tranquility or purification of tranquility classic. So if you're going to be really decisive, but the decision is to be completely still and tranquil, and then, to find that balance point with all these other movements, that takes dragon-like or bear-like ability to stay there, to stay in tranquility instead of what's the next thing, or I think I'm itchy, or something like that. And I'm kind of making references on purpose here. So again, Huang Ting Jing, the Yellow Court classic, the Yellow Court being the courtyard where all of the moving elements come together into stillness. That's just another reflection for staying in the eye of the hurricane of the mind by ceasing the clock of the mind. right? So gallbladder is on the list of really important places to, you could say, define, so you kind of refine in practice with respect to state and with respect to its kind of ming, its potential as aliveness, to be that willing. Okay, the next one is for your lungs. So fei shen, the spiritual state of your lungs, is called hua hao, which again, hua is that interesting term that keeps coming up in the Huang Ting Ching around the flourishment or the transformation. I was, I am, the diminishing, non-beingness of I am. So there's, form to formless. And it's sometimes used as a term to describe something that's kind of glowing or shiny. So sometimes we can say that the spiritual state of the lungs is to be a shining splendor, a radiant thing that's glowing. Now, in one sense, very practical sense, that's a great image for your aura in the sense of Wei Qi, the part of your Qi system. Of Wei Qi, the part of your Qi system that's sort of your boundary of where you end and the physical world begins, but also how you interact with it, how it may protect you. And the character of Wei is the part of the army, the guy with a little flag that runs towards a certain situation to bring the rest of the army with them. So it's considered to be kind of the defensive line of your immune system in the kind of most mundane immune system sense. But it's also the part of you that reaches out as the autonomous, coherent you, and is that shining splendor of pure light, of pure color in that sense. So Su Cheng is always attaining or always becoming emptiness. Now you could say that in the simplest sense of, if your lungs aren't feeling empty, you can't inhale to fill them. There's a lot of different breathwork practices where we hold the breath out, seal the throat, and then wait until the emptiness inspires a deeper trigger from within the base of the diaphragm, so that we're not breathing from a panicked state of, oh no, what if I don't breathe? We're breathing from a sort of raw, almost kidney willingness to live. So there's a lot of different practices that help us feel into that, right? So that state, you could say on the outside, the Wei Qi of the lungs is that shining splendor of your aura. But on the inside, it's creating that kind of cavity of vacuum, of emptiness that allows us to actually feel that spark of life to breathe in, which, when babies are first born, that's the thing we do, is we either wait for it to breathe in, or we do things that inspire it to breathe in to make sure that inherent emptiness is activated to bring on life. And one could say you could even finish that up in the sense that our last breath ends at that same point, when we no longer breathe in and the emptiness resides as complete emptiness, which is another way to translate that. So the last one is for your liver. So gan shen, the spiritual state of the liver, is again used to be in one version of the document, Nangyan, now it's Longyan. So instead of the ability of something bear-like, yan is like smoke, like some cigarette smoke or something that's coming off of the process of transformation, like the smoke from something burning. So we can say Longyan, like dragon smoke, which sounds cool in the sense that dragon smoke is a nickname for other things in the world. But it's also that ability to transform things and produce a kind of waste, which is something your liver inherently has to do. In Chinese medicine, we talk about shu xie, the dredging and draining, the pulling away of the muck and the mire, out of the blood and out of the fluids of the body, which we excrete outwards. So, from a physiological point of view, I think that's fairly clear. From a state point of view in meditation, that's also an invitation, from a dragon-like or bear-like place of mythical ability, to just let what we're attending to that isn't pure go. Now this is maybe a weird example, but think of people you've met who are overtly spiritual in the sense that they want you to recognize that about them as soon as you meet them. Now, doing the work that I do, meeting the people that I do, going to conventions and seminars and things, you could say I've met a certain palette of human beings, and there's a certain look in the eyes, a certain wideness, a certain expectation of excitement and openness that seeks recognition, that you could say kind of like a toxic version of spirituality, in the sense that it's really only there to make sure everyone else sees that it's there. So you could call that like an exhaust or a reflection, or this is maybe a horrible way to say this, but if you've ever stepped in dog poop and you have to wipe the poop all over everything, if I've been through some kind of conference or something where I've met 10 people like that in a row, there's a part of me that actually just wants to go and kind of wash that off, because it's being projected onto everyone around them. So, I'm picking that as just one example. I could pick, 50 other things. But I think there's a quality of discernment that is, if you're producing something that is an off gas, that's, the smoke of the dragon, the smoke of the pipe or whatever, that everyone else has to smell and deal with, then do a really good job and burn it into the most pure ash, the most pure smoke that you can, in the sense of that ability of that bear, that mythical capacity of that dragon to really move beyond the look at me part of spiritual practice, so that, perhaps the exhaust is unseen, the factory is an unknowable thing. And in Taoism we sometimes talk about the idea of undiscernible refinement. It's why certain groups within Taoist culture will often dress in a way that's like maybe not fashionable on purpose, so that when someone sees someone who's not looking for attention, that's part of the practice of refinement, is to stop needing it to be confirmed by anything outside of you. And its name, 自汉明, is another really great play on words. So han is like to contain. And we talked about this with earlier about han xiong, the way we breathe, the way that we can hold our chest up to be proud, the way we have to, in some sense, collapse the chest, in some sense, contain what's held within the breathing space of the body just right, so your diaphragm hits this perfect level, you could say, of balance between yin and yang, up and down, tight and relaxed, active and passive. That is an inherent quality of seated and standing meditation, han xiong, to kind of contain what's moving in and out of the chest, which I described as how you would contain something in your mouth, right? It's not tight, it's not flaccid, it's just enough to keep it where it's meant to be. So han ming would be to contain what is radiant, contain the brightness, to, I would say, dim your shine, but to regulate, like a dimmer switch, the shine that you have in spiritual practice. So again, our innate process and purpose, and the liver relating a lot to assertion and purpose and planning, isn't there to be seen, and that's perhaps a very beginning aspect of meditation, but it's coming back from meditation expecting for someone to notice. We've got the big eyes of, I just went to a retreat, look at me, and sometimes that look is very authentic, and sometimes that look is very much notice how radiant and shiny I am, right? So that gives us a sense of where we want to be with the nature of the liver. And maybe one last thing to say about that, because of the liver, the gallbladder, and daimai, the belt meridian, are all very much contained and mutually dependent on balance and imbalance. So when we're really studying our breath work, really studying the microcosmic orbit, the meridians, the dumai, ranmai, front and back, the chongmai in the center, and how all that relates to the cultivating foundation, and then perhaps even working alchemically, that all relates on the resilience and capacity of your belt meridian to open and narrow. And again, if we're always busy constraining our daimai to get met, get seen, get accolades, we're not actually doing the work, because you can't do the work without enough letting go and opening completely. Right? So if it's always squeezing up and out, there's not enough of its opposite to truly breathe, or to truly absorb, or to truly interact with the conscious parts like Hun and Ling, and that dark underworld of the kidneys. So before ending this conversation, I just want to bring up the Huang Tingqing quickly, the Yellow Court Classic. It's one of the first alchemic documents that are written, was written by a woman. Her name was Lady Wai Hua Tsun, and she was one of the kind of founding progenitors of the Shangqing Pai, the rising clarity or rising purity lineage of Taoist practice, which was very informative to the family tradition I studied, as well as the classic text, the Huang Tingqing, the Yellow Court Classic. So, as I've mentioned, there's quite a lot of the details in that classic that are either on this document or alluded to in this document. And that's one of the ones that I'll be relying on when we go into the building foundation training with respect to why I'm making these videos for people. Because there's some very, very clear insight from about 180 to 280 AD, when these aspects of practice were first being formalized and eventually written down and then used as the actual founding documents for an entire lineage, one of the oldest lineages of actual formal Taoist practice. So just to give you a sense of that book, where it's from, who initially wrote it, and what we might be able to do with it in the future.